Hello guys, how's it going? My name is Dal. Another build for the beta, another set of class updates, though this time around we are seeing a lot more tuning as of recently. With the expansion fast approaching, we are going to see a bunch of adjustments from buffs where needed to nerfs where necessary. But until then, I'm so glad that I've had the opportunity to show off some of the strongest, some of the best, and some of the most powerful class specs so far in the beta that are absolutely pillars to every raid and dungeon group, because some classes really do have the ability to just carry their entire team to success quite easily. And Archmage has been one of those playstyles that have gotten a lot of quality of life improvements, rotational adjustments which are all beneficial, but also a ton of damage injection that has really put him above everybody else. Though this week's build we are seeing adjustments for Arcane, though it isn't doom and gloom just yet, however, and also updates for Frost Mages, which have been the unsung hero of mages. And honestly, it's kind of criminal that not as many players are playing them right now in the beta, though maybe these arcane nerfs, quote unquote, might give some room for the Frost Mage to shine. As always, if you guys enjoy regular class updates like these over on the beta, be sure to follow the channel. Otherwise, let's dive right into this set of adjustments. Like a massive pillar that supports the entire 5-man party, the class of mage has risen to prominence throughout its time over in the beta, but like every other giant before it, everyone has to take a fall at some point. And for mages, this is probably the softest fall available. I think it's fair if you've been paying attention to the beta performance. Mages, compared to some of the most ranged classes, are quite ahead and are doing quite well when it comes to their general standing, like dungeons, raiding, PvE content of any kind, PvP in particular, the playstyle, the enjoyment factor, the amount of work that's gone into them. Like, they feel like a quality playstyle overall in any form of endgame progression. So a lot of players were expecting some kind of nerf to happen, and I guess now, today, and this week is the time for additional tuning, though don't be surprised if there's going to be even more tuning in the future. For the mages, we have changes to Spellslinger, which has been a match made in heaven for the spec of Arcane. It is super passive, but also synergetic with a nice gameplay loop around the Arcane Orb ability that fuels you full of resources that allows you to do more as a spec, which feels really good to play into. The Spellslinger for Arcane in particular is seeing quite popular nerfs. It's a very popular pick for Arcane, probably at this point more popular than Sun Fury, which has a lot of popularity at the very beginning, but I mean, Spellslinger really quickly took over. Some of the Arcane specific changes we're seeing for Spellslinger will be with Splintering Orbs, where your first orb that hits an enemy will now generate 2 Arcane Splinters instead of 4. This plays into the Spell Frost Teaching playstyle that gives you a chance on any Arcane Splinters to fire off another Arcane Orb at 100% effectiveness. So you are going to be generating a little bit less orbs than usual, but it's still a fairly frequent amount. Spell Frost Teachings as well, by the way, is supposedly says it's supposed to launch Arcane Orbs at 50% effectiveness in a blue post. Right now it's 100% effectiveness, so I wouldn't be surprised if this got toned down in the next build or over a hotfix. And apparently this one is also not supposed to increase the damage of your Arcane Orb. And maybe they've already nerfed it and reduced all these damaging components already, but in the tooltip it doesn't really say it, and you don't necessarily really feel it in dungeons, for instance, because I mean, a huge portion of those orbs is the arcane power that it provides, but the damage itself is supposedly being lowered down a bit. As for the spec of Arcane itself, we also continue to see additional adjustments. Like, for example, the capstone of High Voltage, which I like a lot, has been adjusted a little bit. It's, I think for the most part, is a nerf. The damage from arcane missiles now has a lower chance to grant you arcane charges, from 20% down to a 10%. But your chances increase by 10% every time arcane missiles fails to grant you charge, kind of like a bad luck protection moment. That one has actually been increased, so it has been added a bit more consistency. But I think the problem with this count was a feast or famine mechanic. Either it was just giving you a lot of procs really rapidly, or just not quick enough. So they lowered the base version, but the bad luck protection, I think, kind of sort of helps make up for it a little. But still, for the most part, it is a slight nerf. Aether Attunement, and for the most part with the mages, I think all of the missile type of builds that really make it super powerful, that's also going to get adjusted as well. Like Aether Attunement, for example, which combos off of that High Voltage, where after every 3 clear castings, you gain Aether Attunement, where your next missiles will deal more a set amount of damage to your primary target and like offset damage to nearby targets. So the cleave damage has a bit of a fall off. They've recently toned it back down, So your single target arcane missile will do 100% damage, but your additional missiles will do 50% to secondary targets. This was adjusted from 150% to primary, 100% to secondary, so take it down to 50% off of all of those damage components. Besides this, base abilities such as your Arcane Blast has been toned down by 5%, Arcane Missiles has been reduced by 5%, and the Barrage ability has also been reduced by 10%, which is kind of the core of your basic playstyle as an Arcane, but that core can really make up a good portion of your overall build. Like in AoE, missiles can become this cleave element, cleave component that generates your arcane charges, so instead of spamming around arcane explosions, you will actually end up using missiles a lot more aggressively, especially when you pair it together with Arcane Harmony, which has arcane barrage damage buffs and elements and such like that. So it's basically, you're not seeing arcane mages nerfed in single target, but it's rather like an overall holistic nerf in all cases. However, I feel like arcane nerfs were kind of inevitable. Like I said, everybody who's been playing beta, I think, expected for arcane to start seeing some kind of downward adjustments after a little bit of time. And for the most part, I think what we've seen out of Arcane so far is that they've really done a good job in terms of improving the overall playstyle and the feel of the spec in particular. It is very fluid and it's a ton of fun. And what I'm excited for as somebody who enjoys the Arcane Mage of Dragonflight even right now, which is a little bit unwieldy and not a lot of newer players in particular really enjoy playing it. I feel like now it's a little bit more approachable and more open, and I'm so excited for more players to pick up Arcane Mage or even give it a proper try, and definitely should have one ready at least to play around with during the pre-patch event. But do expect more changes and more nerfs to come for the spec of Arcane in particular. Just because it's been such a powerhouse so far, we are going to see more tuning, I think, in the future, and don't be surprised when you see more of it. Besides that, though, we don't only see nerfs this time around, we are seeing buffs, however. Frost, in particular, has been the spec that's been this unsung hero of mages, which hasn't been performing all that terribly, but it definitely has gotten the least amount of attention compared to Fire and Arcane. Though the attention that it has gotten, it's gotten a couple of changes, couple of updates that are good, but it just hasn't seen that same overhaul that we've seen with Arcane and Fire in particular, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing. Not everybody wants to be able to go into the next expansion having to relearn the class entirely from scratch, and that's one of the benefits of Frost. You don't have to. It's going to retain a lot of its core components, from its shatter windows, the ice lance windows, the flurries, the lineups, the glacial spikes. All of those things are still transferable into the next expansion, just with a couple of new talent additions as well as hero talent adjustments. And this week, we actually got some talent changes for Frost, specifically when it comes to some of the ways that they can approach their capstones and how those capstones can help synergize with some of the hero talents. Starting off with the talent of Death's Chill, which was added back kind of like as a Shadowlands-esque playstyle from way back in the day, and they wanted to bring that back into the spotlight to allow for more Frostbolt-focused builds. Death's Chill has been adjusted where it's no longer under slick ice. Now it's off to the side next to Fractured Frost, which gives you this Frostbolt Cleave element talent, which can go into Cold Front for more additional frozen orbs from Frostbolts and Flurries, and when you cleave, it gives you quite a bit of extra additional resources. So now Death's Chill is on the side off of the Cleave talent, and now stacks up to 12 times with the 2% Frostbolt damage increase per stack of the ability. And while you don't see nearly as many Frost Mages over in the beta when it comes to doing dungeons and such, I did run into a Frost Mage that was playing as the Frostfire build with a huge focus on Frostfire Bolt. I am not exactly sure what kind of a build he had specifically, and I really wish I took a screenshot of it, but he was blowing everybody out of the water with this ability, as well as the procs of Frostfire Empowerment. It was ludicrous. And I'm pretty sure he was playing around potentially with the Death's Chill talent in particular. So it's kind of wild to see just how good the talent setup has been for him. And I can't really replicate it. I've been trying to find a way to replicate it with this talent and with the Death's Chill, but I'm just not exactly sure what he did, and I'm still searching for it, but it has a lot of potential. There could be a lot of value in this type of build, especially when you cleave in multiple targets at once, and there's some Mythic Plus dungeons in particular. Hell, there are even some raids where there's consistent cleave that a Frost Mage can really take advantage of, which could be huge for the spec in particular, especially if you enjoy the frosty type of cleave. Another talent for Frost Mages that has been adjusted is Time Anomaly, mostly to fix up some of the interactions with Frost Mages, which is going to result in a sizable damage increase. It's kind of like boring, mathy stat stuff right here, but for the most part, the Icy Veins talent will now grant you a Water Elemental. As a Frost Mage, when you proc a Icy Veins, you get a Water Ellie, and as the Water Ellie does damage to the enemy target, he builds up a buff called Frigid Empowerment. Your elemental is empowering you, increasing your frost damage dealt by 15%. Ever since they reworked the way that the Icy Veins ability works, not only does it grant you a haste buff, but now a direct frost damage buff as well. And the water elemental is a big portion of it. Previously, with this proc here with Time Anomaly, which wasn't really ran before in Dragonflight, but it is going to be, looks like, the incumbent talent you'll probably spec into for this expansion. When you did get Icy Veins from this trait, you never got the Water Ellie, so you never got the damage increase, so it was always a little bit underpowered. But now that the Water Ellie does end up proccing, it makes it so much better. But also, refreshing Icy Veins will no longer break a certain handful of talents that actually help you to play further into the Time Anomaly playstyle, and trust me, it feels like Icy Veins procs quite a bit when I play with this talent. Talents such as Fractured Frost, which get this kind of like a damage cleave element to it. This one used to break when you had Icy Veins, and then let's say you had a proc of Time Anomaly, or vice versa. You already were in Icy Veins of Time Anomaly, and then you use an unused Icy Veins to help extend it. It actually broke this talent interaction, so it was very, very, very unusual to play around it because you just lost the buff, but not anymore. Same goes for Slick Ice, which empowers the damage of your Frostbolt. So this kind of synergy for Frostbolt or Frostbolt cleaving, that can become even better. Death Chill also would break, but now it doesn't, and when we talk about Frostbolts, think of Frostfire Bolt, not the basic Frostbolt, but the empowered version with Frostfire, which could be so, so good. Another one that got changed as well has been Thermal Void, if I can find it. Thermal Void, there we go. Icy Veins duration increased by 5 seconds. Your Ice Lances as well as Glacial Spikes can extend the duration. So this talent would also break as well when you had that double up on your Icy Veins. So this is good. This is actually really, really good. So potentially this could allow for mages to have a bit more of a consistent type of playstyle around the Frostbolt window, which is more of an AoE cleave element. So kind of like a cleave-centric type of playstyle, but it has some single target potential, like the damage increases here, the base damage amp for your Fracture Frost, the faster casting but also increased damage for Slick Ice. All of those elements could allow for a Frostbolt hard-casted playstyle, which may potentially end up being kind of played in this expansion, or at least there's a chance, thanks mostly to the Frostfire Bolt, as long as all these talents are tuned correctly. Besides this, we also have had some of the other talents like Glacial Spike get a 10% damage increase, which is a talent that you'll end up most likely running as a mage in all forms of content, just a raw damage increase. Another one that's been interesting too is Ray of Frost. Upgrade talents have now been split. You'll see there's now two options. You have your Cryopathy, where each time you consume Fingers of Frost damage, your next Ray of Frost is increased by 5%, stack it up to 50%. Icy Veins procs grant you 10 stacks instantly, so that could also play around the Icy Veins playstyle. The other one is going to be Splinter and Ray, where Ray of Frost, which is mostly a single target ability, now does 25% of its damage to 5 nearby targets. So if you want to pick this ability up for the proc rate, for the charges of Fingers of Frost potentially, and the damage that it does, but you primarily want it to do for AoE, you can pick up Splintering Ray. If you want to heavily invest into Ray of Frost, make it single target and AoE, you can invest into Cryopathy as well as Splintering Ray. I don't normally play with Ray of Frost. It isn't an ability I've been really exploring that much as a Frost Mage, and the couple of times that I tried, it's a weird ability because it actually interacts with the Frost Mage in a way where it does benefit from things such as Shatter and all the other elements, but it doesn't necessarily consume things such as when you flurry, you put up Winter's Chill debuff on the target, so the enemy is treated as if they're frozen. You spam Ray on them, it doesn't actually consume the charges of flurry, so I've always had a bit of a hard time kind of trying to figure out adding in as part of my rotation because it doesn't quite interact like an Ice Lance or Glacial Spike or Frostbolt does. So I'm just not that familiar with this ability, but there could be some opportunity for it to potentially be used in very specific builds or in very specific situations. But as it stands right now, currently, the Frost Mage gameplay, even though you won't see nearly as many of them over on the beta compared to Arcane, when you do see them and when you play one, they feel good to play. I mean, I think for the most part, Mage as a class in general feels very good to play. It doesn't matter whether you're Frost, Arcane, or Fire. It feels that all three specs are in a fantastic spot, and they feel smooth, and they feel like there's quite a bit of ways for you to be able to augment your builds to suit just about every situation, which is always a good thing to see. And again, even though Frost is not as popular as we've seen compared to Arcane, when you do see a Frost mage that knows what they're doing, it is wonders, and the amount of damage they can push out is absolutely incredible. I feel like Frost in particular, after all of these changes, which hasn't been nearly the same as Fire and Arcane, still has a lot of potential for builds though, right? The spec itself didn't change too much, but there's a lot of opportunity for cleave damage, a lot of opportunity for AoE damage, single target output damage, and now Frostbolt ability adds in itself is getting a little bit more love and attention, and then the way that it can interact with your Frostfire playstyle too with a Frostfire bolt, it is awesome to see some of these synergies kind of starting to come together now. I feel like for the most part, Frost is a bit of a forgotten spec. Not as many people remember that it even exists, but it is effective, it is solid, and even though you don't see that many of them, I think it'd actually be a really solid choice, and it's a fantastic learning spec for anybody new to Mage. I feel like Fire is a bit gear heavy, and there's a bit of timings and cooldown management. Arcane has a bit of a weird flow that a lot of players usually sometimes struggle to get into, and there's some cooldown management in terms of the priority and how you structure them. I think Frost is probably the most accessible version of Mage, so if you are going to be getting a Mage up and running, I definitely would take a look at Frost during the pre-patch time after all of these class changes. And in the meantime, I'm actually going to take some time to explore some of the other builds and see if I can dig up and find that Frostfire Bolt Cleave build that the other mage ran, because it was incredible to watch them do that kind of damage, and I want to see if I can recreate it for myself. But with that being said, who cares, honestly, what I think about all these mage updates? I want to hear from you guys' thoughts in the comments below. Like, overall, what are your thoughts on the nerfs coming to the spec of the Arcane? Have you got to see any of the Arcane mages and how much damage they do? And do you agree with these nerfs or not? And do you think maybe they should use more or less nerfs going forward? Let me know your thoughts. Also, what do you think about the changes coming to the spec of Frost? And were you aware that Frost is actually decent and actually somewhat good? And out of all the mage specs right now for the War Within, which one excites you the most? Is it the spec of Fire with its combustions and its updated Living Bomb explosive builds? Is it the Archimage, the Goliath that it's been for the last couple of weeks, literally carrying every raid group and dungeon group for the last bit of while? Or are you excited about the potential of Frost mages going forward? Which of the specs draws you the most right now when it comes to War Within? Let me know all those thoughts in the comments down below. As per usual, if you guys enjoyed this video or found it informative, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. I would very much appreciate it. And as always, in the description of every single video and live stream, we have a link to our Discord community channel. Probably the best place to reach out to me directly in case you want to let me know what you thought about this video or hang out with the rest of the community to discuss some of the upcoming changes. Join our Discord to become part of the community. But otherwise, thank you all so much for watching this video. I do hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know all of your thoughts down below. And as always, I'll see all of you guys in another video.